The far right makes gains in European elections, but the centre-right holds strong. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. After millions of Europeans voted across 27 EU member states, what does the outcome mean for the political landscape in Europe? The fallout has already been felt in France, where a surge by the far right has led President Macron to call for a snap parliamentary election. That will take place in just a few weeks. For more on the European election, we begin with this report from William Denslow in Brussels.
A shift to the political right was widely expected, and across much of Europe, voters delivered, with both domestic and regional ramifications. A bruising loss to Marine Le Pen's national rally prompted French President Emmanuel Macron to call a snap election, and right-leaning groups now have a larger voice in the European Parliament.
Questions of defence, security, matters of migration policy, European values, these are all items that really are important for our citizens. So when they go to vote, they expect solutions.
But turning a gain in seats into influence will be a challenge. The European People's Party has retained its position as the biggest player here in the European Parliament. Now it's up to the EPP to strike alliances and form a governing coalition. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is seeking a second term. She says her EPP group will be an anchor of stability in Parliament.
Together with others, we will build a bastion against the extremes from the left and from the right. We will stop them. This is for sure.
Who those others are remains unclear. The EPP's two major centrist coalition partners for the past 5 years are weaker after Sunday's election, leaving the door open for parties across the political spectrum, including the right-leaning European Conservatives and Reformists, or ECR.
Are they going to look at ECR, or are they going to include the Greens? I really hope for the latter, because only then we can preserve the democratic forces and strengthen Europe. And otherwise, yeah, we will be dependent on very unpredictable and undemocratic forces.
If re-elected, von der Leyen says her policies will be pro-European, pro-Ukrainian and pro-rule of law. But building a coalition willing to back her is certainly not assured. William Denslow, CGTN, Brussels.
Joining me now to discuss all of this is Klaus Larres. He is Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and he's a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Joining us too is Joav Toker. He is Associate Professor with the American Graduate School of International Affairs and Diplomacy in Paris. Also with us from Rome is Cecilia Sottilotta. She is Professor of Politics at the University for Foreigners of Perugia, and joining the discussion too is Pieter Cleppe. He is Editor-in-Chief of BrusselsReport-EU. Welcome to all of you. Joav Toker, let me start in France. As we just heard, the far-right National Rally Party made big gains. And then, of course, we had that surprise announcement from President Macron. He called for a snap election, a legislative election in France. What is your assessment of the outcome of these elections?
Well, contrary to what has been expected to some degree before the elections, namely the extreme right parties in the European Parliament will come to this new Parliament in a very clear, stronger position. This has happened in a very moderate way. They have become more powerful, but still the major forces in the center and center-right dominate the parliament. So on the overall European machinery, things have not been that dramatic. But when it comes to the two major powers of the EU, namely France and Germany, the internal political modifications of what has happened over the overall parliamentary elections is far-reaching. And first of all, France, as you mentioned, snap elections at the end of the month, 2 rounds, and lots and lots of question marks as to what is going to happen with the 3 remaining years of the presidency of Emmanuel Macron. It's a presidential system here in France. Macron stays at the Élysée Palace as president, whatever happens in parliament, but will he be able to be an active actor in the political life, or would he be in sort of a passive, awkward situation for the remaining 3 years of his presidency?
Right, okay, Joav, Toker, let's talk a little bit more about that domestic impact in France. Let's listen to some of what President Macron said in the aftermath of those European elections. Let's watch.
It is a situation to which I cannot resign myself. The rise of nationalists and demagogues is a danger not only for our nation, but also for our Europe and for France's place in Europe and the world.
So that was a surprise announcement calling for those legislative elections. Some would say it was a shocking announcement. But how risky is this for Macron? Because we have seen Marine Le Pen. She has been building this movement for years. She's been gaining among the public. I mean, is there a possibility that she could deal another defeat to Macron?
Yes, there is a possibility, and therefore the answer to your question is yes, the risks are high. Now, could we frame at this moment, about 3 weeks before the first round, there are 2 rounds of parliamentary elections in France? No, we can't. And even the very first indications of the polls and institutes cannot actually help us, because they just reconfirm what has been the overall portrait of the electorate behavior 3 days ago for the parliament, for the European Parliament. Yes, there is more than a theoretical danger, risk of the extreme right of Madame Le Pen, the leader of the extreme right National Front Party, with the president Jordan Bardella, who is working together in sort of a ticket with Madame Le Pen. Yes, there is a risk that they will have a majority in parliament, either an absolute majority or a relative one, but which might be sufficient in order to operate in a way which would make a government headed by the Front National possible. And this is the danger. In a way, it would make France enter in what the French called cohabitation, in which you have a president on the center right-hand side of the political spectrum, and you have a government which in this case would be extreme right.
Right. Klaus, let's talk about what happened and the impact it's going to have in Germany. It was a bad day for German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. We have the far-right Alternative for Germany, also known as the AfD party, beating all 3 parties in Scholz's coalition. So what does it mean for the coalition right now?
For the time being, it doesn't mean too much, because Olaf Scholz has made clear he has no intention to bring about the dissolution of parliament, as we saw in France. It will be much more difficult under the German system. In any case, he couldn't just dissolve parliament as he pleases. He had to ask for a vote of no confidence and then lose that vote before parliament could be dissolved. And the outcome wasn't entirely unexpected. The Conservatives still won overwhelmingly, but the AfD, the far-right party, came second, much less than the Conservatives. But this is worrying. But it will not affect German politics in any practical way. However, only this fall there will be elections in eastern Germany, and here the AfD is polling 30%, sometimes even higher. This is worrying, disconcerting. But the real decision will come in 2025 when national elections will be.
That's right, actually, Klaus. If you look at a map of how the parties voted and you superimpose that map, say, on the old West Germany and East Germany, those were almost identical, weren't they?
Absolutely. It's a deeply polarized society. And I think what politicians of all colors should do is actually address the concerns of the people, because people who are voting for AfD are not Nazis. Some of them are, maybe 10% of their voters, but all the other voters, they are simply discontent what is happening in German society. And that has something to do with the economy, has something to do with immigration and other factors.
So what is the appeal? I mean, are they becoming more mainstream, the far right?
Not so far, but in due course it probably can be expected. There is talks that the Conservatives, the Christian Democrats, might be tempted to go into some sort of working arrangements with the AfD. So far that is a no-go area, but voices from below have been heard which suggest that. I would of course like to warn against that. That shouldn't be the case, but I think should be done by the mainstream politicians is really to address the concerns of the voters who voted for the AfD. And here, above all, the economy, immigration, and other factors play a role.
Okay, Cecilia, great to have you with us. Let's talk about what happened in Italy. I mean, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, her Brother of Italy party did very well. What does it mean for her and for politics in Italy?
Well, Giorgia Meloni's party did very well in this election, and this is even more striking if we consider what happened in France and in Germany, like the other guests just said. From the standpoint of Meloni, this was sort of a confirmation of the trust, that's what she said, that the Italian people gave her 2 years ago. But I would add two sort of pieces of information to see, that the picture is much more nuanced than it looks at the first sight. First of all, so the turnout was pretty low by Italian, standards, and she did very well in terms of share of the vote, but in terms of absolute numbers, she lost some votes. So that's the first thing. Second thing, interestingly, the opposition, the main opposition party, the Democratic Party in Italy, center-left party, also did very well. And this means, I think, that the public opinion has sort of rewarded these latter parties' leadership for starting to talk about socioeconomic issues. So I think that's the interesting it's an interesting picture. But for sure, Meloni celebrated the result as a victory.
Yes, Cecilia, we talk about Meloni's party being on the right, and she did very well, but it also affected the far right in Italy, didn't it?
Yes, Meloni's party is far right. So it's by no means a mainstream right-wing party. This would be Forza Italia, perhaps. But no, Meloni's party is far right. Naturally, she's been quite pragmatic, I would say, and she has shown so far, when it comes to foreign policy, her moderate face, right? So also in the context of the European Union, she is now seen as a pretty reliable partner with whom it is possible to negotiate, which I think is going to happen, within the next few months and years in the context of the newly formed European Parliament.
Pieter Cleppe, as we saw in that report from our correspondent, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she was very happy with the outcome of this election. Let's listen to a little bit more of what she had to say.
This is outstanding. We had a fantastic campaign. We were determined. We were united. We made it. And now we won the European elections. We were convincing, and all this paid off.
So she is expressing something of a full-throated victory there, Peter. What does this result mean for her? Is it likely that she will remain president of the Commission?
Well, to be clear, she was not running herself.
Yes.
She was visiting countries, in the name of the EPP, this group of political parties, which has indeed increased its number of MEPs. Will this mean that Ursula von der Leyen will be reappointed and then supported by the European Parliament? I think if you look at the European Parliament, she has around 400 MEPs. Support from her own group and the Social Democrats and the centrist Renew group. With some deal with Meloni, which is possible, I think if it's about the European Parliament, I think she's likely to get support. Maybe even some German Greens will support her, because at the end of the day, she was quite the left green herself over the last 5 years. However, French President Macron has an election coming up, and I'm not so sure as other observers that Macron will dare to nominate her, because she has really been a controversial figure in the French campaign. You know, people have referred to her quite extreme European Green Deal that has angered farmers and industry. So will Macron support her? That's the big question, I think.
Okay, Joav, Toker, let's get back to Marine Le Pen and what she had to say about the upcoming legislative elections. Let's watch what she said.
We are ready to be in power if the French people give us their support in the forthcoming legislative elections. We are ready to turn the country around, ready to defend the interests of the French people, ready to put an end to mass immigration.
So, Joav, Toker, part of her appeal has been her very tough stance on immigration in France. I mean, how much of that resonates in the country? And we know that there have been problems in the country with integrating immigrants into French society.
Yes, it is. These are the three major issues in French politics over the recent years, not necessarily in this order: immigration, security, and purchasing power. And Madame Le Pen and her second, Mr. Bardella, and I guess the international community should get acquainted with this name, Jordan Bardella, who may become a prime minister in about a month from now, have addressed themselves steadily and intelligently, I should say, in terms of electoral techniques and operationality, to these three major issues. Now, France is not extremely original in that. We'd find these themes elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in the world, the way we would find similar characteristics of these European elections in other countries, in other continents, including the US, by the way. But the Front National of Madame Le Pen, who has never been part of any government, any coalition, is also exploiting the fact that they have all failed. The left has failed, and the right has failed, and the center has failed. Give us the extreme right, although she doesn't call herself extreme right, she calls herself the patriotic right. Give us a chance this time. What do you have to lose after having watched passively the way others have failed consecutively?
Klaus, I mean, how big is this issue, the issue of asylum and immigration? I mean, and could we say that's the reason why we're seeing the rise of, you know, right-wing candidates, even independent candidates who fall on the right, nationalist candidates?
Yeah, I think populists all over the Western world get a lot of energy from the immigration issues. That also is the case with Joe Biden and the United States, and certainly with Germany and France. Can I just say, I think when we look at, take a step back and look at the European elections overall, the outcome wasn't too bad. The right was really stopped in Poland and Hungary, much of Central and Eastern Europe. It made some progress in some other countries, but the outcome overall was actually that the progress of the far right was halted. Now we have Macron calling snap elections, and suddenly he puts a lot of energy into that, and suddenly we talk about some extreme outcome of the European elections. I think Macron's decision has more to do with French politics and his personal fate and his personality than it has something to do with European elections and the trend of the times in Europe. So I think, you know, and the gamble Macron has embarked on may well backfire. When we think of Brexit and the British, David Cameron went to the country and believed the British would stay in the European Union. That backfired badly. I fear Macron's decision will badly backfire on himself.
Yeah, but what's the calculation? Why did he do that? I mean, what is he hoping to achieve?
He, of course, hopes that the French voters, when they rethink their vote, when they have the chance to vote again, they will move away from the far right and vote for the more centrist parties, including Macron's party. And I think that may backfire, because we hear today talk about a realignment of the extreme right, and that may, you know, end up that Macron will be a lame duck for the remaining 3 years of his presidency. There even have been rumors that Macron may think about resigning, which I don't think will be the case at all. But I think French politics is in turmoil right now, and one of the reasons is Macron himself. It's not the election result which caused the turmoil. It is Macron's snap election and Really, his kind of impetuous and spontaneous personality which got us there. And I think that is what we should consider. It's French politics rather than European politics, which has created a lot of turmoil and instability.
Yeah. Cecilia, let's get back to European politics. I mean, do you agree with Klaus's assessment there that, you know, if we look at the election, despite the gains that were made by the right, the status quo has been largely maintained?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that, I mean, the signal that has been sent by the European electorate should not be ignored, because I agree that indeed there are issues that are not being addressed, and I'm especially talking about socioeconomic issues, rising inequalities and such, which are not being addressed by mainstream parties. But so this is a signal not to be ignored, but at the same time, we did not see that avalanche that some were fearing or, you know, expecting.
And Cecilia, what is your view on the poor performance by Green Party candidates? I mean, they've made climate change a very important issue in the election. We've seen these farmers' protests in Europe as well. Why did they do so badly?
I think that we should look at results country by country, because, for instance, in Italy they did pretty well compared to other countries.
Yeah.
In general, I think that the Green Deal is going to be at the center of a lot of contestation in the next months and years. And we saw that, as you said, like with the protests, like by farmers across Europe. I think that we should look at the big picture. We should look at a situation where Europe is not sealed off from the rest of the world. Europe is part of a still globalized world. And the feeling by public opinion, and what also, for instance, politicians like Meloni say, is that having too many constraints in terms of environmental policy means losing competitiveness for European businesses vis-a-vis partners and rivals across the globe. So I think that could be a possible explanation for the Green parties not faring overall that well.
Pieter, as Cecilia points out, you know, if we look at this on a country-by-country basis, we do see extremes from one end to the other. But generally, if we look at the election across Europe, the centre-right has held. It has done well. Would it be fair then to assume that most Europeans, especially those who voted, have not really voted for major change?
Well, I do think you have to take into account that center-right parties have sort of shifted away from endorsing some of the most extreme aspects of green policies, especially in the European Parliament. The EPP over the last year has, finally started to vote against this. They now want Ursula von der Leyen to sort of unwind the ban on a combustion engine. And this is also quite crazy that you have a ban on, traditional cars, basically, while Chinese competitors are actually very good when it comes to electric vehicles. I think a lot of these policies have come under strain, and I hope are likely to be corrected. Also, when you talk about immigration, there are now 19 European leaders that are in favor of something along the lines of the UK's Rwanda model. The UK has not been able to implement it, but the core idea of this is that you would sort of externalize asylum processing outside of the European continent, so to break the back of the terrible human smuggling model, to make sure that when people pay a lot of money to be smuggled into Europe, that there's no point, because they can only get in if they have a positive asylum decision.
Joav, Toker, we just heard a very tough critique of President Macron there from Klaus a moment ago. Do these results weaken the French president, and what happens next for him?
Oh, these results obviously weaken his overall position, which has been weakening over a particular amount of time for now. And I agree with a large extent of what my colleague said. President Macron's originality, if you wish, and political creativity, if I may say, was due precisely to the fact that he was surprising. He used to be surprising. He did use successfully political formulas which were original on the French political scene. On top of the fact that he was politically young and handsome and has a personal life of some flavor, if I may put it this way, that helped him achieve power, arrive in the Élysée Palace. Now, I remind everybody that he's been in power for 7 years now. He has been re-elected 2 years ago for a second 5-year mandate. And since the beginning of this second mandate, things are going bad and worse for him over political internal issues, mainly related to, indeed, elements that we have already mentioned, immigration, some pension reform, problematic one, which had, I think, a lot of protests. So he had accumulated a lot of problems, remaining in a way original, capricious at times, some would say arrogant. And this is the political price he's paying right now. And we're still perhaps just at the beginning of this road, if indeed the parliamentary elections at the end of the month, it goes badly for him.
Klaus, how important are these European elections, besides giving us an idea of what the European political scenario looks like? I mean, do these MEPs really have power to influence policy in national governments, or is it the other way around, actually? Do national governments influence how the European Parliament behaves?
Well, the European elections have become more important recently. They used to be totally unimportant. No one really paid any attention at all. This has changed, and the European Parliament has often shot down legislation coming from the European Commission. One example is the investment treaty with China, which was not ratified by the European Parliament and is in limbo ever since. And that, of course, indicates that the European Parliament has an important role to play. But in the last resort, it is the European Commission, and in the very last resort, it's the national governments, the European Council, which calls the shots. And von der Leyen will also have to be nominated by the individual nation states in the EU, and that is decisive.
Does that have to be unanimous?
No, yes, it has to be. Yes, that indeed it has to be, and she has to get all countries on board. And I think there is a good chance that she will succeed, because with the current turmoil in the European Union, do the individual countries really have an interest in adding, in addition to that turmoil, by getting rid of von der Leyen and trying to find a replacement candidate? I can't see it. So her chances are actually relatively good, I would say.
Despite the problem she might have in France?
Yes, I think so, because Macron doesn't want to add to European turmoil either. And we should not forget, initially, von der Leyen was actually Macron's candidate. Of course, he changed his mind a little bit in the meantime, but maybe he will support her further.
Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C.